Greetings, and welcome to the Saratoga Story, a podcast dedicated to the history, culture, and commerce of Saratoga Springs, New York. Last time we met, we wandered the hollowed halls of the Pyramid Mall. Today we're going to take a different path. We're going to stroll down Potato Chip Lane. This episode is going to be short and savory, coming in under 15 minutes. Believe it or not, the potato chips' origins are a slightly contentious issue, so if I make some factual errors or put out something you disagree with, make some comments and we can do a follow-up episode. So I invite you to pop the top on a soda pop and open a bag of your favorite deep-fried tubers while we delve into the history of America's favorite snack food. I'm Peter Burley, and thank you for joining me. Let's talk about America's most ubiquitous snack food. Let's talk about every sandwich's favorite sidekick. Let's talk about the crispy, crunchy wonder that is the potato chip. Instead of reciting statistics about per capita consumption of potato chips in the United States to demonstrate the importance of the potato chip to our society, I'd rather do a thought experiment. Something a little more personal and close to home than dry statistics. Let's call it the proximity and supply test. Since the agricultural revolution started many millennia ago, human beings have been moving the foods they value most closer to their proximity. Instead of hunting and following herds, we put up fences and domesticated cattle. Instead of going out into the wilderness to gather fruits and vegetables, we planted crops. We bring the foods we value closer to our proximity, and then we also increase their supply. Think of grain silos. Let's apply this to the potato chip. Right now, take a moment to think about how far away you are from a potato chip. In my case, I've got a bag of potato chips within arm's reach, but that's not a surprise because I'm doing a podcast about the subject. But even if I didn't have a bag of potato chips right here in my home, I'm no farther away from potato chips than the nearest convenience store, or if I was at work, the nearest vending machine. Now, as far as supply is concerned, can you remember the last time you went to your grocery store and they were completely out of potato chips? I would say that with confidence, I could right now go to the nearest grocery store and acquire more potato chips than I could eat in a day. Americans value potato chips so much that we keep them close at hand and in large quantities. And this makes perfect sense. I mean, what's not to like? I think of the potato chip as the closest thing you can get to long-lasting portable French fries. Salted French fries straight out of the deep fryer are one of life's true joys. But French fries come with a culinary downside. They have a seriously short shelf life. Think about eating French fries with dinner at a restaurant. And then think about taking the remains of that dinner home in a to-go container, putting it into the refrigerator. Now think about reheating that meal. The French fries are not going to be the same. Potato chips, on the other hand, don't have that problem. They're portable, and they last a long time. It makes perfect sense why we love them so much. So, what does this all have to do with Saratoga's story? Well, as it turns out, America's most beloved snack food was created right here in Saratoga Springs, New York. The legend goes like this. The year was 1853. The location was Moon's Lake House in Saratoga Springs, New York. The chef was a man by the name of George Crumb. It was a hot summer day. A hungry patron entered the establishment. He ordered fried potatoes, one of the house's specialties. When the potatoes arrive at the table and the patron samples them, he sends them back. The potatoes were not prepared to his liking. They're too thick. He wants them thinner. George Crumb, in the kitchen, is informed of the customer's request and complies, sending out thinner-cut fried potatoes. When the potatoes arrive, our surly patron is once again dissatisfied. He sends them back again. He wants the potatoes cut thinner. Reaching a point of exasperation, George Crumb in the kitchen, now having to remake this order twice, decides to go all out. He cuts the potatoes wafer thin and throws them into the boiling oil. He overcooks the potatoes to a point of thorough crispness. He sends this plate of overcooked wafer-thin potato slices back to the customer as a take that. The customer receives the potatoes, tries them, and exclaims that they are delicious and orders a second plate, and thus the potato chip was born. These new deep-fried potato wafers become a sensation and become known as Saratoga chips. Fast forward to the 1970s, where this legend becomes codified and popularized in advertising campaigns, and thus becomes the de facto story of the birth of the potato chip. I should also mention that in some versions of the legend, the customer is no less a person than Cornelius Vanderbilt himself, which raises the stakes of the story and adds to the mystique. And that, my friends, is the whole story. We can wrap it up right there. Podcast is all done. That's it. That's the whole... You know what? Give me a second. I gotta go to the hamper so we can air out some dirty laundry. I know there's probably a few persnickety bookworms out there who might raise objections with the legend and what academics might call its lack of historical accuracy. If you happen to go to Wikipedia and look up their entry on potato chips, you will see their place of origin being the United Kingdom in 1817. Apparently, there was an English chef named William Kitchener who published a recipe for essentially what is the potato chip back then. Furthermore, there are some issues with the accuracy of the legend itself. There are questions of whether or not the Moons actually owned the lake house at that time in 1853. It may be that they didn't own it until 1854. There is also the issue of Katie Weeks, who also worked in the restaurant, and some say she was the one that actually made the potato chips that day. There is also the issue that at the time that this story was supposed to take place, Cornelius Vanderbilt was in Europe. And then there is the issue of the biography that George Crumb had commissioned for himself, which apparently made no reference whatsoever to the potato chip. Okay, so the question becomes, why, in spite of the historical evidence, does George Crumb win out as the creator of the potato chip? Or why does the legend take hold and become the de facto origin story of the potato chip? Well, I think there's a number of factors involved, and I don't think any of them involve anything particularly nefarious or anyone deliberately trying to obfuscate the truth. The first thing is, we really have no idea who actually invented the potato chip. I mean, if you think about it, people had probably been frying potatoes in oil for a long time before even William Kitchener in England. And there was probably somebody who dropped potato shavings into hot oil. And that nameless person is the true inventor of the potato chip, but there's no possible way to know who that person actually was. William Kitchener was the first guy to publish, although he's the first guy we know of who published. History turns up new things all the time, and sure enough, we might find some French chef who had published a recipe prior to that. I believe George Crumb became popularized as the inventor of the potato chip over Kitchener because he had something that Kitchener did not. History lies right on the fault line between the humanities and the sciences. While history can be viewed as a subset of the science of anthropology, I don't think too many people would argue with me that history is not an exact science. I mean, look at the word history itself. Break it down into its two component parts, his and story. Now, if we put aside the unfortunate gender implications of the first half, look at the second half and we get the word story. The George Crumb legend has what William Kitchener's recipe book does not. It is a story. It's a light and airy story, just like the potato chip itself. When human beings write history, we are compelled to create stories. In order to not be overwhelmed with an ocean of facts and dates and names, we are forced to condense that information into a narrative so that we can draw something valuable from it. While we hope to always work and refine these narratives to be as factually accurate as possible, inevitably we are going to fall short in creating an exact replica of historical events. Humans learn through stories, and one of the byproducts of this is that often a good story will win out over factual evidence. It's just in our nature. And when narratives really win out in history is when there is a void of information, and it becomes so easy to impose a narrative into that void. I believe that's what happened with the legend of George Crumb out on Saratoga Lake. Potato chips don't really become the worldwide phenomena that we know them as today until into the 20th century. Saratoga chips had been around, and you can find old menus as far off as like Colorado that had Saratoga chips on the menu dating back to the 1800s and whatnot. But the phenomena that we know of potato chips today doesn't really start happening until mass production and processing can have them shipped all over the world. And so often when something becomes such a large phenomena, we want to know how it all got started. And I think it was relatively easy to trace the potato chips lineage, at least in the United States, right back to Saratoga Springs, and then someone had a story going around where it was George Crumb. And that day in August, when he sliced the potato chips really thin for Cornelius Vanderbilt and created this new sensation. Well, the amateur historian in me thinks it's important to know the historical facts. The Saratogian in me starts to lean towards the man who shot Liberty Valance in this story. That is, when the legend becomes fact, print the legend. So, does Saratoga really have a claim as the birthplace of the potato chip? I'd say yes. Yes, it does. Now, granted, William Kitchener published his recipe back in 1817, but I don't believe there is any record of anything called, like, London slices becoming a sensation in the British Isles at the time. However, there is strong evidence that potato chips were called Saratoga chips well into the 20th century, thus creating a direct line of succession from Saratoga chips to the worldwide phenomena that is potato chips today. And as for George Crumb being the historical inventor of the potato chip, no, probably not. But we can always say, legend says George Crumb back in 1853 at Moon's Lake House, and carry on with the story. So long as we acknowledge that it is legend and not supported by historical research. As for the legacy of the potato chip in Saratoga, it made us answer in Trivia Pursuit and Jeopardy for many years. It was an interesting fact to throw out there about your hometown. And to this day, there is still a company located in Saratoga Springs making Saratoga chips. And I don't know about you, but I like that. It could perhaps be argued that without the legend, that company wouldn't be here today. While it is questionable if George Crumb ever made the first potato chip in Saratoga Springs, what is unquestionable is that we are making them here now, inspired by legend. So thank you for joining me on this trip down Potato Chip Lane. That's an actual street name in Saratoga Springs. And next time, we're going to tackle something a little heavier. We're going to tackle Benedict Arnold. So join me then for the next episode of The Saratoga Story.